So I'm not gonna lie, this show is gonna be very Vancouver-centered over the next few hours, and for good reason. My Vancouver Canucks have just come off of the heels of one of the biggest trades they have made in the past few years. And no, we're not talking about the Marcus Pettersson trade. We are talking, of course, about JT Miller. There's going to be so many more videos that we have to make, commentary topics that we have to explore, because nobody is putting this topic to rest, probably for the next few weeks or so. So, with that in mind, we're taking a quick break from the Vancouver talk and diving into some Montreal Canadiens word that was given out earlier this week. Because the Canadiens, not only did they make themselves some roster moves today, but there also was an interview done with Alan Walsh that gives us some very interesting information. So, let's talk firstly about the Montreal Canadiens roster moves. As always, this show is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Go out there and check out the first link in the description to get some free months in your VPN, save your money, and support the YouTube channel here all in the process. Let's talk about the Montreal Canadiens because they have recalled forward Owen Beck and defenseman Logan Mailloux from the Laval Rocket. This, hopefully, will be the sign of good things to come for them and their development. Owen Beck had played a very small sample with the Montreal Canadiens this season, and while I don't want to say that he was, amazing, he was just kind of there. He floated around for 7 minutes a game. Wasn't really the most substantial impact maker on the ice, but that's not really what you need him to be at this stage in his career. I mean, he's a first-year pro who was playing in the OHL last year, so obviously he is still transitioning. 20-year-old guy, not bad in the slightest for him to get some smaller stints in the Canadiens organization, but it wasn't even just him. Logan Mailloux also gets called up here as well. Mailloux, of course, had a bigger cup of coffee, a medium venti-sized cup of coffee with the Canadiens this season. 3 points in 5 games. So definitely a productive point production metric. In fact, he's got 4 points in 6 NHL games in total, which I think is, maybe unsustainable in the long term once this guy actually gets significant NHL playing time, but he has been pretty good in Laval this season, 22 points in 36 games played. We'll take a look and see what these guys are able to do, if they even get games in the first place, or if they just kind of stick around in the press box. But Montreal roster moves aside, we do have ourselves some more things that we can discuss in the world of Montreal Canadiens hockey, like Ivan Demidov, who earlier today scored himself 2 assists in a 4-3 overtime win versus Dynamo Moscow, which puts him all the way up there, tying the Kirill Kaprizov U20 point-producing record in the KHL. Demidov has 42 points in 50 games played, which is good enough to tie Kaprizov's 42 points in 49 games played, which he was able to successfully score in the 2016-2017 Salavat-Yuleev season. Obviously, Kaprizov did it in 1 fewer game played, but we do have to recognize the differences here. Kaprizov was playing on a team where he was allowed to be the number 1 guy. Ivan Demidov is playing on a team where, for the most part, it's been very difficult for him to get playing time. Montreal kind of had to force their hand themselves at giving this guy the minutes by flying over to St. Petersburg and sitting down with head coach Roman Rottenberg. So the next point that Demidov scores will break the record, and I assume that he's probably going to get at least another point this season. Of course, knock on wood, nothing too substantial happens in a negative way. But for now, Ivan Demidov, this is an achievement to be celebrated. The fact that he is in the Hall of Fame of Greats for U20 KHL point scorers alongside of Kirill Kaprizov, who is one of the most valuable players in the National Hockey League today. At least when he's in the lineup. He's not really doing much when he's out, like where he is right now. Unfortunately, that groin of his just has not recovered in the ways that we hoped it would. Anyways, sticking with the Montreal-Minnesota connection, I wanted to turn your attention over to a TVA Sports interview. Take a look at this. It's a commentary made by Alan Walsh, the agent of Marc-Andre Fleury, speaking with Renaud Lavoie of TVA Sports. This article will be linked in the description. It is a full-on video interview on the JIC show, but also linked in the description is an article on HabsFanatics.com, which goes out there and transcribes some of the comments made by Alan Walsh. Take a look at this. Renaud Lavoie went out there and asked Walsh, was there ever a time at any point during Marc-Andre Fleury's career when you thought he would play for the Montreal Canadiens? Alan Walsh replied, yeah, there were a few moments where we believed it. There were a few moments where there were discussions about it, yes, but the timing just never really worked out. And for a large part of Marc-Andre Fleury's career, the Habs obviously had Carey Price, an amazing goalie, a future Hall of Famer. It just never really came together. Fleury and the Habs. And so hearing this, I wanted to focus this commentary on Marc-Andre Fleury and how he potentially was almost a Montreal Canadien at multiple times throughout his NHL career. Now, here's the thing about Fleury. Yes, Alan Walsh is correct. For a good chunk of Fleury's career in Pittsburgh, hey, guess what? The Habs had Carey Price. There was really no need for Montreal to get a goalie like Fleury at all, really. But if you think about what happened afterwards, okay, let's say Carey Price's last season with Montreal is the benchmark. Let's say around the Cup final time, around 2022 time, this is where you start to see the transition. Well, Marc-Andre Fleury in the 2020-2021 season was in Vegas. He had a Vezina winning year. Thank goodness the guy was finally able to get himself a Vezina trophy in 2020-2021 with a .928 save percentage, so good on him for getting that award. But he also went over to Chicago and eventually Minnesota. He did all this in the span of 3 years. So when you think about this time, okay, what were the Montreal Canadiens doing in the 21-ish, 22 era of their seasons? Well, this is where Carey Price was on his last legs, maybe quite literally speaking. And he played his final game for the Montreal Canadiens on April 29th, 2022, but he didn't play much, that's the thing. The Montreal Canadiens in the 21-22 season were already being carried by guys like Jake Allen, for example, and Sammy Montembeault. They were here for a while. So, for Montreal, the next few seasons of Carey Price's departure, you saw that Allen-Montembeault tandem do some damage with a whole bunch of other goaltenders suiting up for the Habs in the meantime. You had the Andrew Hammonds, and you had the Cayden Primos, and you had a whole bunch of other random names playing games at some point. Michael McNiven was in there, and, you know, things got a little bit difficult just trying to manage all the goaltenders coming in and out of the Montreal Canadiens organization. Could Marc-Andre Fleury have been an option? Well, he was floated around to Chicago and Minnesota for a while, so I don't want to say it was ever a bad fit. But of course, you know, Marc-Andre Fleury being a Quebec guy and having his roots in Quebec and having this story attached to him of being one of the most decorated goaltenders in the NHL's history books, obviously it would have been a nice storybook ending for him to find himself in Montreal in some capacity after playing all the time he did in Vegas and Pittsburgh. Vegas, of course, he had the best save percentages of his career, which is interesting when you consider how good he was in Pittsburgh for all those seasons as well. But to see him potentially be a Montreal Canadiens guy, that, of course, is significant, and I think a lot of Habs fans would have been super stoked to see that go down, even if it was for a very small amount of time. We know Minnesota Wild fans have treasured Marc-Andre Fleury to the best that they can, even though he is in his last legs. He's 40, after all. The guy had a shutout against Montreal the other day. Like, he's still doing all this stuff at 40 years old. And sure, the Montreal Canadiens didn't make his job particularly difficult on that game. In fact, the Canadiens have started to struggle a lot in their own gameplay the past few games here. I'm not really too happy about that, considering I went all in and getting Patrick Laine and Alexandre Carrier and Caden Gooley in a lot of my fantasy leagues for blocks and stuff. But still, you know, there are some good stories that we could talk about, like this one, how Marc-Andre Fleury was almost a Canadian. So with that in mind, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comments section below about all this Habs stuff, with Ivan Demidov tying the record in the KHL for U20 skaters, with Marc-Andre Fleury potentially being a Canadiens target. What are your thoughts on the roster moves? Owen, Beck, and Logan Mailloux are back in the organization. Let me know in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.